Zain Parker's heart raced faster than his luxury sports car ever could as he stood outside Stepping Time Dance Studio, clutching the business card like it was a lifeline rather than something his board of directors had foisted on him. Corporate events were becoming more elaborate each year, and after his embarrassing performance at last season's charity gala, his PR team had delivered an ultimatum: learn to dance, or never live down the viral video of him stumbling through a simple waltz with the mayor's wife. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, straightening his custom Tom Ford jacket. At 28, Zain had built Parker Tech from a dorm room startup to a multi-million-dollar tech security firm, yet something as simple as a two-step had him paralyzed with anxiety. He pushed through the door before he could change his mind. Inside, the studio was nothing like he'd imagined. Instead of pretentious mirrors and gold trim, the space was modern yet warm, polished hardwood floors gleaming under tasteful track lighting, with large windows letting in the late afternoon sunlight. A small reception desk sat empty, but soft jazz played from hidden speakers. "Hello." He called, his voice echoing slightly. "Just a moment." A female voice responded from a back room. Zain wandered toward the center of the studio, absently checking his watch, a habit from too many board meetings. His assistant had booked a private session, paying premium rates for after-hours instruction to avoid paparazzi, or worse, his competitors seeing him floundering around a dance floor. "Sorry to keep you waiting." The voice materialized into a woman, and Zain turned to find himself momentarily speechless. She was tall and graceful, wearing simple black dance pants and a fitted burgundy top. Her dark hair was pulled back into a neat bun, highlighting striking cheekbones and eyes that somehow matched the warm amber of the studio's wood floors. "You must be my 6 o'clock, Zain Parker," he said, extending his hand automatically, the way he'd done thousands of times in business meetings. The woman's smile was warm but professional as she took his hand. Her grip was surprisingly firm. "Hadley Vance, I'm your instructor." She glanced down at his Italian leather Oxfords. "You might want something more comfortable for next time, but we can work with these today." Next time. Zain found himself saying, "I'm not sure there will be one. This is, well, it's not exactly my idea." Hadley raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess, someone important is getting married. Corporate function," he corrected, uncomfortable with how easily she'd assessed him. "My PR team thinks I need to stop embarrassing myself and the company on the dance floor. At least you're honest." She smiled again, but this time with a hint of challenge. "Most reluctant students claim they've always wanted to learn," Zain shrugged. "I built my business on transparency." "No point starting lies now." Hadley moved to a small sound system in the corner. "What kind of dancing will you need for these functions? Basic ballroom, some Latin?" "Whatever doesn't make me look like I'm having a seizure," Zain replied dryly. She laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to brighten the already warm room. "Let's start with the waltz. It's classic, elegant, and surprisingly straightforward once you get the rhythm." She pressed a button and soft orchestral music filled the studio. "First, we need to establish proper frame." Before he knew what was happening, Hadley stepped into his personal space, a zone typically reserved for his closest friends and family, which were few. She took his right hand in her left, placing his other hand gently but firmly on her upper back. "Your hand goes here, not on the waist," she explained, guiding his palm to rest just below her shoulder blade. "And stand taller. Imagine there's a string pulling you up from the crown of your head." Zain adjusted his posture, hyper-aware of the warmth of her back through the thin fabric of her top. He'd held women before, of course he wasn't a monk, despite what the business tabloids sometimes implied about his workaholic tendencies, but this felt different. Clinical yet intimate. "Now, the basic box step," Hadley continued, seemingly unaffected by their proximity. The man steps forward with his left foot first. For the next hour, Zain focused with the same intensity he applied to quarterly reports and product launches. The waltz was mathematical, he realized. Patterns, timing, spatial awareness, all things his analytical mind could grasp. By the end of the session, he was moving with passable confidence, though his turns were still jerky and his rhythm occasionally faltered. "Not bad for a first lesson," Hadley said as the music faded out. She stepped back, breaking their connection, and Zain felt oddly bereft. "You're actually quite coordinated when you stop overthinking it." "High praise," Zain said, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "Though I suspect you say that to all your students." "Only the ones who don't step on my toes," she countered with a small grin. He glanced at his watch. "I've kept you overtime, I should go." "Same time next week?" she asked, walking toward the reception desk. Zain hesitated. His schedule was packed: meetings in San Francisco, a product launch in Chicago, but something made him nod. "My assistant will confirm," he said, slipping back into business mode. "Of course." Hadley's professional smile returned as she handed him a receipt. "Until next week, Mr. Parker." "Zain," he corrected automatically. "Zain," she repeated, and somehow his name sounded different in her voice. Outside, his driver was waiting with the car. As Zain slid into the backseat, his phone buzzed with notifications: 37 emails, 5 missed calls, and a text from his sister asking if he'd died in a dance-related accident. He smiled despite himself and texted back, "Survived, barely." What he didn't add was that for the first time in months, he'd spent an entire hour not thinking about stock prices, market competition, or his next acquisition. Instead, he'd been focused on counting beats and the surprisingly complex mechanics of leading someone else across a dance floor. "Home, sir?" his driver asked. "The office," Zain replied, already opening his laptop. "I have some work to finish." But as the car pulled away from the curb, he found himself looking back at the warmly lit studio window, where Hadley's silhouette moved gracefully through what appeared to be a solo practice routine. "On second thought," he said suddenly, "home will be fine." The following week, Zain arrived at the studio 5 minutes early, wearing proper dance shoes his assistant had ordered. Hadley looked pleasantly surprised. "Someone's taking this seriously," she observed, eyeing the shoes. "If I'm going to do something, I do it right," he responded, setting down his briefcase. "Even something I didn't want to do in the first place." "Always the charmer," she teased, and he found himself smiling. This lesson focused on the foxtrot, which Zain found more challenging than the waltz. His competitive nature kicked in and he pushed himself hard, growing frustrated when he couldn't master a particular step combination. "You're too tense," Hadley said after his third attempt. "Your shoulders are practically at your ears." "I don't like failing," he admitted. "You're not failing, you're learning," she countered. "There's a difference." Her hands came up to his shoulders, gently pressing them down. "Dancing isn't like business, Zain. You can't force it through sheer willpower." "How do you know about my business?" he asked, suddenly suspicious. Hadley rolled her eyes. "Google exists, you know. After our first session, I looked you up. Parker Tech Security Systems, 30 million in venture capital last year, featured in Fortune's 40 Under 40. Did I miss anything?" "The part where I hate dancing," he said wryly. "No, that was abundantly clear from the moment you walked in," she laughed. "Now, again from the top, and this time breathe." The lesson continued, but something had shifted. Zain found himself relaxing more, making jokes about his missteps rather than growing frustrated. When they took a water break, he surprised himself by asking, "How did you get into teaching dance?" Hadley's expression changed, becoming more guarded. "It's a long story." "I've got time," he said, checking his watch. 17 more minutes to be exact. She hesitated, then said, "I was a professional dancer with the Chicago Contemporary Ballet for 6 years. A knee injury ended that career path, so I pivoted to teaching." "You miss performing," Zain observed, noticing how her eyes had drifted toward the empty stage area of the studio. "Every day," she admitted, "but teaching has its rewards too." She set down her water bottle. "Enough about me. Back to work, Mr. CEO." Over the next several weeks, their sessions fell into a pattern. Zain would arrive precisely on time. They would dance for an hour, progressing from basic steps to more complex routines, and then gradually they would talk. 5 minutes at first, then 10, then nearly half an hour after their 6th lesson. He learned that Hadley lived alone in a small apartment downtown, that she had a cat named Tchaikovsky, that she still performed occasionally with a small modern dance collective. She learned that he worked 70-hour weeks, that his parents had died in a car accident when he was in college, that his only family was a younger sister studying abroad. What neither of them acknowledged was the growing tension between them, the way his hand lingered slightly longer than necessary on her back, the way she sometimes leaned into his frame when they weren't even dancing. After their 8th lesson, as Zain was gathering his things, Hadley said suddenly, "You know, there's a charity ball at the art museum next weekend. It would be good practice for you dancing in a real-world setting." "Are you suggesting I crash a charity event?" he asked, amused. "No, I'm suggesting you take me to it," she said boldly, then immediately looked as if she regretted her words. "As your instructor, I mean, to evaluate your progress." Zain felt an unfamiliar flutter in his chest, something between panic and anticipation. "I have a board meeting that night," he said automatically, then cursed himself for the transparent lie. "Of course," she said, professional mask sliding back into place. "Just a thought." He should have let it go, maintain the clear student-teacher boundary that had kept things uncomplicated. Instead, he found himself saying, "But I can reschedule it. What time should I pick you up?" The smile that broke across her face made something in his chest tighten. 7 would be perfect. That Saturday, Zain stood outside Hadley's apartment building, feeling strangely nervous. He'd negotiated million-dollar deals with less anxiety than he felt waiting for her to come downstairs. When she did, his practiced composure nearly cracked. Hadley wore a deep emerald gown that seemed to float around her as she moved, her usually restrained hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She looked like something from another world, a world where beauty existed for its own sake, not as a commodity or marketing tool. "You clean up nicely," she said, eyeing his tuxedo. "So do you," he replied inadequately, wishing he had better words to express how breathtaking she looked. The charity ball was held in the museum's grand atrium, with string lights suspended from the high ceiling and tables arranged around a central dance floor. Zain knew several people there, business associates, potential clients, local celebrities, but for once, he wasn't focused on networking. "Nervous?" Hadley asked as they stood at the edge of the dance floor. "Terrified," he admitted with a small smile. "Don't be, just remember what we've practiced." The orchestra began a waltz and Zain took a breath, extending his hand to her. "May I have this dance, Miss Vance?" As they stepped onto the floor, Zain was acutely aware of the eyes on them. Of course people would notice him dancing with someone new. But once they began moving, everything else faded away. Their months of practice had created a kind of physical shorthand between them. He could signal a turn with the slightest pressure of his hand, and she would follow effortlessly. "You're not counting out loud anymore," she whispered, teasing. "I'm too busy making sure I don't make a fool of myself," he replied. "You won't," she said with unexpected softness. "I won't let you." The dance ended too soon, and they separated with reluctance. Throughout the evening, they danced several more times, interspersed with Zain introducing Hadley to various business acquaintances. He found himself watching her as she charmed everyone she met, her genuine warmth a stark contrast to the calculated politeness that dominated these events. "You're staring," she said when they reunited after she'd been chatting with a museum curator. "You're fascinating," he replied honestly, "because I can dance." "Because you're real," he said. "Do you know how rare that is in my world?" Something shifted in her expression, a vulnerability he hadn't seen before. "This isn't a business transaction, Zain. I'm not something you can acquire." "I never thought you were," he said, surprised by her sudden sharpness. Before she could respond, they were interrupted by a silver-haired man in an expensive suit. "Zain Parker, I've been trying to get a meeting with you for months. Zain suppressed his annoyance, slipping back into CEO mode. Mr. Reynolds, good to see you. Have you met Hadley Vance? The conversation derailed into business talk, with Reynolds barely acknowledging Hadley's presence. When Zain finally extricated them, he found her distant, her earlier warmth replaced by polite detachment. "Are you okay?" he asked as they walked toward the coat check near midnight. "Fine," she said unconvincingly. "It's getting late and I have an early class tomorrow." The drive back to her apartment was silent, tension filling the car. When his driver pulled up to her building, Zain turned to her. "Did I do something wrong?" Hadley sighed, looking tired suddenly. "No, you didn't. I realized something tonight watching you in your element." "What's that?" "That this," she gestured between them, "isn't real. You hired me to teach you to dance, and I did. Mission accomplished." "That's not all this is," Zain said, a note of desperation creeping into his voice. "You know that." "Do I?" she challenged. "Because from where I'm standing, I'm just another transaction. Dance lessons completed, payment received, on to the next business objective." Her words stung because they exposed his greatest fear, that he had become so entrenched in the transactional nature of his life that he'd lost the ability to connect authentically. "That's not fair," he finally said. "Maybe not," she conceded. "But maybe I need to protect myself before I start believing in something that isn't there." She opened the car door. "Thank you for tonight, Zain. You danced beautifully." Before he could respond, she was gone, a flash of emerald disappearing into the building. Zain didn't sleep that night. Instead, he paced his penthouse apartment, replaying every interaction with Hadley over the past weeks, trying to pinpoint where things had gone wrong. By morning, he had made a decision. He arrived at the studio 30 minutes before his scheduled lesson, finding Hadley finishing up with another student. She looked surprised to see him waiting, her professional smile not quite reaching her eyes. "You're early," she said after her student had left. "I need to tell you something," Zain said without preamble, "and I need you to just listen." Hadley crossed her arms but nodded. "I've spent the last decade building a company that consumes nearly every waking moment of my life. I measure success in stock points and market share. I've convinced myself that's enough." He took a step toward her. "But these past few months with you have shown me what I've been missing. When I'm here, I'm not Zain Parker, CEO, I'm just me." "Zain, let me finish," he said gently. "Last night, I behaved exactly as you accused me of doing, falling back into business mode, treating people as means to an end. It's a habit I need to break, and I want to break it. With you." Hadley's arms slowly uncrossed. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to keep dancing with you, but not as your student. I'm saying that for the first time in years, I'm thinking about someone other than my company. And it terrifies me, but it also feels right." A long moment passed between them, heavy with possibility. "Dancing with a CEO can be complicated," she finally said, a small smile playing at her lips. "I've never been afraid of complicated," he responded, taking another step toward her. "Your next lesson isn't free, you know," she teased, the tension between them finally breaking. "I was hoping we could renegotiate the terms," Zain said, close enough now to see the amber flecks in her eyes. "What did you have in mind?" "Dinner, tonight, not as teacher and student, just as Hadley and Zain." Her smile widened. "I think those terms are acceptable." That night marked the beginning of something neither of them had anticipated. Their dinner stretched into hours of conversation, laughter, and confessions. Zain spoke about the pressure he felt to keep growing his company, the loneliness of leadership. Hadley shared her grief over losing her dance career, her struggle to redefine herself afterward. In the weeks that followed, they established a new rhythm. Zain still came to the studio for lessons, but now they were followed by dinners, movies, long walks through the city. He found himself rearranging meetings to make time for her, delegating tasks he would once have insisted on handling personally. His sister, home from studying abroad, met Hadley and immediately approved. "She makes you smile," she observed. "I haven't seen that in a long time." 3 months into their relationship, Zain surprised Hadley by taking her to Chicago to see her former ballet company perform. Watching her face as she absorbed the performance, equal parts joy and wistfulness, he realized he was falling in love with her complexity, her resilience, her unwavering authenticity. Later that night, in their hotel suite overlooking the city where she had once performed, Zain held her as she cried not from sadness, but from the catharsis of finally closing one chapter of her life and embracing another. "I never thought I'd find something that filled me up the way dancing did," she admitted, wiping away tears. "But being with you, it's different, but it's just as meaningful." "You've changed me too," Zain told her. "You've shown me there's more to life than quarterly reports and strategic acquisitions." "Don't tell your shareholders that," she teased. "Actually," he said, suddenly serious, "the board has noticed a change. They say I'm more focused, more decisive. Turns out having a life outside the office makes me better at my job, not worse." Their relationship wasn't without challenges. Hadley struggled with the public attention that came from dating a high-profile businessman, especially when tabloids reduced her to Parker Tech CEO's dancer girlfriend. Zain grappled with balancing his demanding career with his desire to be present for Hadley. 6 months in, they hit a serious rough patch when Zain had to travel for 3 weeks straight, missing Hadley's first choreographed showcase with her dance collective. His absence hurt her deeply, and when he returned, laden with apologies and gifts, she was distant. "I don't need presents, Zain," she said, leaving his carefully selected gifts untouched on her kitchen counter. "I need to know that I matter enough for you to show up." "You do matter," he insisted. "More than anything. But my company will always come first," she finished for him. "I understand that. I just need to decide if I can live with being second." The possibility of losing her hit Zain with physical force. That night, alone in his penthouse, he realized that all his success meant nothing if he couldn't share it with the woman who had taught him not just to dance, but to truly live. The next morning, he made an unprecedented decision. He appointed his longtime COO as interim CEO and took a 2-week leave of absence, something he hadn't done since founding the company. When he showed up at Hadley's dance studio during her afternoon class, the students whispered and pointed, recognizing the man whose face occasionally appeared in business magazines. "What are you doing here?" Hadley asked when the class ended, students filing out with curious backward glances. "Learning to prioritize," Zain answered. "You were right. I've been putting everything else before us, convincing myself it was necessary, but nothing, not even Parker Tech, is worth losing you." Hadley looked skeptical. "So you're just taking time off 2 weeks. And after that, things will be different. I've been working with the board to restructure my role. More delegation, fewer nights and weekends." He took her hands. "I built a company from nothing, Hadley. I can figure out how to be a CEO and still be the man you deserve." It took time to rebuild what had been damaged, but gradually, Hadley began to trust in Zain's commitment. He proved it not with grand gestures, but with consistent presence attending her performances, meeting her for lunch between his meetings, creating space in his life for their relationship to flourish. 1 year after their first dance lesson, Zain took Hadley back to the museum where they'd attended the charity ball. The atrium was empty this time, save for a string quartet he'd arranged to play just for them. "What is all this?" she asked, looking around in amazement. "I wanted to dance with you where it all began," he said, extending his hand. "The night I realized I was falling for my dance instructor. They waltzed alone in the vast space, more in sync than they'd ever been. When the music ended, Zain didn't release her. Instead, he took a small velvet box from his pocket. When I signed up for dance lessons, I was just trying to avoid embarrassing myself at corporate functions," he said, voice thick with emotion. "I never imagined I'd find the love of my life. You've taught me so much more than dance steps, Hadley. You've taught me to be present, to find joy in the moment, to value connection over acquisition." He opened the box, revealing a platinum ring set with a single perfect diamond. I'm asking you to continue teaching me every day for the rest of our lives. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Hadley's eyes as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." 2 years later, at their wedding reception, they performed a choreographed first dance that left their guests in awe. Hadley, radiant in her gown, and Zain, more confident in his movements than he'd ever been in a boardroom, moved together as if they'd been dancing all their lives. "Not bad for a guy who couldn't waltz," she whispered as he led her through a perfect turn. "I had an excellent teacher," he replied, pulling her closer. As they danced beneath twinkling lights, surrounded by friends and family, Zain reflected on how differently his life had turned out from what he'd planned. His company continued to thrive, but it no longer defined him completely. He had learned to measure success not just in profits and market share, but in moments of connection and joy. And as Hadley laughed in his arms, her wedding ring catching the light as they spun across the floor, Zain knew he'd found the most valuable acquisition of all, a partner who had taught him that the most important steps in life weren't the ones that moved you forward in business, but the ones that brought you closer to love.